Hello again, it's Tyler Mahan Co. back with a review of George and Tammy episode 2, Stand By Your Man. So in my previous video, I mentioned some of the fundamental aspects this TV show is getting wrong regarding the real personalities of George Jones and Tammy Wynette would surely become big problems the further into the story the show gets. And well, that happened a lot sooner than I expected. I guess the best place to start is by establishing something I had to establish almost as soon as I introduced Tammy Wynette in season 2 of Cocaine and Rhinestones, which is that she lied all of the time. And for everyone who's going to get mad about me saying that, it's an objective, demonstrable fact, and one I assume even this TV show is going to have to address at some point. Although I wouldn't be surprised if they pretend she was forced to tell the big lie they're definitely going to need to cover. I'm trying to do these reviews without revealing major spoilers to anyone who doesn't know what's going to happen, so we'll talk more about that particular lie after it comes up on the TV show. But the reason I won't be surprised if they pretend Tammy was forced to tell lies is because they are already misrepresenting major aspects of her personal and professional relationships in order to, well, frankly speaking, in order to make her a more likable character. In retrospect, that is obviously the reason the first episode of this TV show presented us with George and Tammy already being in love with each other within about 10 minutes, with no real explanation of how or why that happened. I didn't talk about this before because I wasn't sure how much this show would be using flashbacks. Apparently they are going to use some, but are not going to use them to cover how or why George and Tammy fell in love. Because the truth is, when Tammy Wynette met George Jones, he was desperately and pathetically obsessed with another woman named Melba Montgomery, who was Jones' first real singing partner for several years at that point, and he had been in love with her the whole time. These videos will get way too long if I try to cover the whole story of what really happened, and I already did that in season 2 of Cocaine and Rhinestones. So again, if you want to know everything there is to know about this story, that's where you'll find it. If you do that, then I believe it's pretty likely you will agree that Tammy Wynette saw George Jones was in love with a woman who was not his wife and who did not love him back the same way. So Tammy began working to get Jones to fall in love with her instead. Both because she really was infatuated with the man she imagined Jones to be, and to boost her own burgeoning music career. But if this TV show made you understand that, then they would also have to make sure you understand how insanely jealous Tammy always was of Melba Montgomery, to the degree that years later she would deliberately try to sabotage Melba's career. And the TV show would have to explain that Tammy basically never let Jones out of her sight if she could help it, which is almost certainly how and why she wound up going against her contract at Epic to record uncredited vocals on some of Jones' MusiCore sessions. In the show, they try to make it seem like Pappy Daly and Billy Sherrill were kind of having a little tug of war to acquire both George and Tammy, when in reality, Tammy did not want Jones to continue working with Melba Montgomery at MusiCore. And her jealousy of Melba is probably the main reason Jones gave up so much money to get out of his contract and go to Epic. The thing they have Billy say to Jones about When the Grass Grows Over Me being his first real hit in years is also total bullshit. He had an even bigger hit the year before on Walk Through This World With Me, but this TV show has to invent reasons for Jones to leave MusiCore because they are not going to give you the real one. By the way, if you have no idea what MusiCore is, or who Pappy Daly is, or who Upal is when that comes up on the phone call from Billy later, it's because the TV show didn't tell you. And they're still doing that thing where they apparently assume you already know a lot of this story, which is weird because if you do, then you probably also know how much they're changing about it in order to paint Tammy as the hero slash victim. Again, begging the question, who is this for? Tammy absolutely did not rewrite the song Stand By Your Man the way it looks in the show. Billy Sherrill did originally title the song I'll Stand By You, You Stand By Me, but that was when he first began writing it, and he worked on it for several years before Tammy ever even heard it. The only thing she did was change 2 lines of the song right before they recorded it, and the rest was entirely Billy Sherrill. The way they make it look like Tammy had to fix Billy's song and Billy was just a controlling asshole is wildly inaccurate. Billy and Tammy had a very special relationship. He wrote more songs for her to record than he wrote for any of the other artists he worked with. The thing they have him say to her about how if he tells her to cut 3 blind mice, then all she better say is to ask what key. He did not say that to her. In basically every interview Tammy Wynette ever gave, when the topic of Billy Sherrill came up, she said her only response to Billy coming in and saying to record 3 blind mice would be to ask in what key. And she said that in order to communicate her belief that Billy Sherrill was a genius in whom she had absolute unquestioning faith. To act as though Billy Sherrill would have talked down to her in such a manner is a choice I've got to imagine even Tammy would be upset about if she were here to give her thoughts on the show. These are not minor nitpicky things. This video would be 2 hours long if I sat here to cover every detail that is inaccurate. This show is getting the entire nature of most of these relationships very wrong. And the reason they're doing that, the main reason at least, again, is so they can make Tammy seem to be a completely different person than who she really was. The whole electroshock treatment thing is probably bullshit. Tammy was known to take stories that she liked and pretend it was something that happened to her. And she talked in her autobiography about having seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a movie that features electroshock therapy, etc. This TV show couldn't even use Tammy's own account of the hotel fight in this episode because her version of that story has so many holes in it, there would be no sane way to present it exactly as she told it. What's interesting about the way they did this particular scene, though, is aside from having Joan shove her into the wall, a thing not even Tammy said happened that night, it's probably closer to what did happen. Before they got married, Jones would get drunk and tell Tammy he was never going to marry her. In season 2 of Cocaine and Rhinestones, while pointing out the various inconsistencies with Tammy's version of that fight, I made the observation that Jones not wanting to marry Tammy is likely what they were arguing about in the hotel room that night. The show is continuing to get a lot about Jones wrong, too. There's a 0% chance that he ever read Don Quixote, and it would blow my mind if he could have even described what that book is about. I strongly doubt he ever asked Tammy or anyone else to call him Glenn, because Glenn is just what his family called him. And after he ran away from home at the age of 15, he started going by his actual first name, which is George. There isn't a single source I'm aware of that claims Jones went over to Don Chappell's house and punched him out to retrieve the nude photos and negatives of Tammy. I guess when you cast a 6'3" actor to play a guy who was in reality quite small, there's a certain temptation to have that actor throw his size around. With the way they're setting it up, I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to fabricate more instances of Jones being physically abusive to Tammy. As for the music in this episode, I was actually surprised by Michael Shannon's singing in a few places. There were definitely still some instances of him straight up failing to hit the notes that he's trying to hit, but it wasn't downright terrible. Unfortunately, Jessica Chastain's singing in this episode was way worse than in the first one. On the slow songs, it almost seems like she's trying to do some kind of sad girl Lana Del Rey type thing. Her timing on the song Take Me was pretty unforgivable, with her continuing to try placing notes where they simply do not go in the song. I honestly couldn't stop laughing during Stand By Your Man because she kept singing it Stand By Your Man instead of Stand By Your Man, the way Tammy sang the song. For everyone who is new to all this and you're actually tracking down the real Jones and Tammy recordings of these songs, you should know their duet version of the song Take Me is really not very good for several reasons I don't want to take the time to get into here. But you will have a much better time listening to Jones' original version on MusiCore. I knew this next thing was going to be a problem when I read the show will feature a performance of Help Me Make It Through the Night, even though it makes no sense to have either George or Tammy sing that song. She only ever cut it as filler. But I really wonder who chose the songs and what they were thinking about. Jones and Tammy did cut Rollin' in My Sweet Baby's Arms, but they only did it as album filler, meaning it wasn't a single and they only recorded it because other artists had much more notable recordings of the song. There are many, many other hit singles. It would make much more sense to show Jones and Tammy singing. It seems as if maybe someone who does not listen to country music just picked whatever songs they had heard of before. Otherwise, I just can't understand the decisions. All right. I have a feeling this video is probably going to be a little long, so I'll wrap it up here, as I can only imagine that other things I would talk about in this episode are going to become even bigger problems in future episodes, and it would make more sense to just wait and talk about them there. Yeah, well, be back in about a week for my thoughts on episode 3 of George and Tammy. See ya.